don't let your accent or your limited English skills be the reason why you feel you can't do something.
Greetings and welcome to the Beyond Fluency Conversation Club. Today I have the pleasure of speaking to someone on the other side of the world, Catherine Crestani, author, podcaster, coach, spiritual guide. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Liam. I'm really excited to see where our conversation goes.
Absolutely. Now, there's lots of things to cover, but I think that something that is important with all our guests is that we get an idea of who you are and how you came to where you are today. So why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my background's as a speech language pathologist, which I did for nearly 2 decades. So I ran 2 businesses. One I built up with a partnership, and I bought into that, and it became a 7-figure business. And the other business was my company, which I built from the ground up, which became a 6-figure business, which all sounds lovely and looks amazing on paper until it's not. I went through so many different changes in my life where first of all, my marriage started to fall apart. So instead of going home, I would stay longer and longer at the office because I could. Because I owned it, I could make that an excuse. There's so many issues, right? But it was actually truly an avoidance behavior. And then when I chose to leave my marriage and choose myself, then my business partnership started to fall apart because all of a sudden I was happy and didn't want to be there as much. And I didn't want that consuming my life anymore. And when that fell apart, I'd been building up my company in the background only to realize that I'd built it in such a way that the business relied on me and I never got to stop. So I ended up with burnout, adrenal fatigue, chronic stress, insomnia, all the fun things that come with short-circuiting your nervous system, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's like an entrepreneurial menu of side effects.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I used to joke I worked 24/7 because I had insomnia. I'd wake up and just start working in the middle of the night because I couldn't sleep anyway. So why not make the most of it, right? And then they created this beautiful thing called delay send on emails. So I was sending emails even at 2 a.m. and I was masking all my issues. But I couldn't keep doing that. And my business and I had a deep yearning, like I was never fulfilled. Like I always was like, I'm here for something more. There's something more I should be doing in this world. And I was really good at my job. I was really good. I worked with a lot of children with autism spectrum disorder, so a lot of nonverbal children. I worked with a lot of children from neurolinguistic diverse backgrounds, as well as linguistically diverse backgrounds, because I worked in a lot of multicultural areas as well. And so there was all these things happening, but I was just never happy. So it was through that I kind of went through my spiritual journey and unpacked that I actually had all these intuitive gifts. And I couldn't understand why I never had an issue. Most of my children and my clients who I worked with autism, I never really had issues with them. And everyone was like, how are they so calm around you? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. And later I realized that I just understood them and just kept that space for them because I was intuitively communicating with them more than just using my words. So stepping back from that, then I realized that I wanted to pull how I worked with children into how I worked with people, but not doing it in the frame of speech pathology because I felt really constricted in what I was doing. I had guidelines and codes of ethics I had to abide by and all those fun things, so I couldn't just say, hey, I had this intuitive hit and I really think you should take this herb, because they'd look at me like, what are you talking about? I did have a handful of clients that knew what I did outside of work, and they were my favorite because they got to do amazing things. Like I taught one of my clients who had high functioning autism how to meditate. And he was like, I can't meditate. My brain won't let me do that. And I'm like, I bet you I can. And he was one of the best meditators. He was so quick because it was just so like, okay, this is the point. This is what I got to do. He just wouldn't let his brain get in the way. It was really interesting working with him. And then I had other children with autism spectrum disorder, and I taught them how to use energy work to help push boundaries because they're actually quite sensitive little souls. They actually feel everything happening. So then I taught them how to do that, and that was incredibly fun as well. But the point of that is then I realized I need to work with the parents, because a lot of the time the parents weren't seeing what was right was happening. Even I remember assessing clients, and they would come in and I'm having this full conversation with their 2-year-old and go, yeah, they're just not talking. I'm like, what are you talking about? I just had this whole conversation with them. We were just talking about how the ball's really big and it's like he wants to roll it around the room. And they're like,
Right.
no. So that whole point of like really listening to people became a big thing, and teaching people to actively listen and then shifting that. So then I started running nature camps, so taking kids back out into nature and connecting again. And what I realized doing that was I became a babysitting service. So parents were dumping their kids with me, using that 2 hours to go shopping, even though they were welcome to stay. And so then I changed my program. So now the parents have to stay. And the reason I'm passionate about that is because I truly believe in connection with people, but also especially between a child and their parent, because you never get to have another go at that. Once this life's kind of ended, it's done. And I know, as a mum, I know that you only get one go of watching them grow up, right? So it's really important to have that connection. And then that just evolved into me now coaching, like with all my spiritual gifts and everything like that, but coaching people in relationships with themselves, with others, with their children, and then also with their life, really, more than anything.
Because what you were doing when you were working as the speech therapist, you were connecting with the kids and helping them connect to language when maybe there was a disconnect before. So the fact that you've followed that pathway to focusing on that area rather than being the business, I think that's, probably the best possible result.
Yeah, and I'm much happier, I have to say. And
Best possible result.
Best possible result. And I don't miss the business aspect of it was really funny because someone said to me one day, why don't you write down everything you like about running the business and everything you don't, including staff, right? And so it was amazing how much I was lying to myself about all the things I was doing, because then when I was really honest, I looked down at my list. I think there was 2 things that I liked and the rest I didn't. And I was like, wow. And I feel sometimes we get so lost in other people's expectations of what our life should look like. And I know that a lot of your listeners would resonate with this because, so often we get this idea of, this is what our life should look like, or, we're going to learn to speak English and this is going to be perfect and we're going to have this amazing life on the other side of that. I'm going to tell you right now, teaching English to children and even to my child, it is so confusing. I will tell you right now. And I just sit there and they're like, and even spelling, teaching kids literacy. Oh my goodness. Right. They're like, but why is it spelled this way? And I'm like, I don't know. There's 8 different ways to spell A, the sound A. Right. And they're like, why? Yeah. I'm like, I don't know. And then there's some exceptions too. They're like, why? I was like, I don't know. I really don't know. And I'm sorry. We're just going to learn it. So
Yeah. Because the answer just because doesn't really carry enough weight with a 3 to 5-year-old child.
Hello. Hope you're enjoying the conversation. If you haven't already, please hit the like and the subscribe button, as well as the bell icon to get updated every time we put up a new episode.
All right, let's come back to speaking about your work as the speech and language pathologist. And you mentioned that you were working with multinational children. What were some of the challenges that you faced working with that group?
It was funny. I was actually thinking about this before I came on, and I was like, what were some of the things? The biggest thing is that a lot of families believe they had to give up their home language so that their child could learn English really well. And that broke my heart. And the first thing I would say is, please don't. I rather you have a really amazing, strong home language than speak broken English to them, because undoing the grammar difficulties is so hard. And this is like all the research shows that if their children come from a good, strong home language, then they can pick up other languages really easy. But it's also consistent. I would have multilingual families and the parents are like, oh, we speak 3 languages at home. And I was like, what do you speak to him? And they're like, all of them. I was like, oh, this poor kid. I'm like, that is a lot. I said, all right, let's pick one to focus on for now. I'm not saying to discount the other ones, but what is your strongest language? So I don't even care if like one parent talks strictly this to them and then one parent talks another language to them, but they just need to know the expectations. because what ends up happening when there's too many languages, kids go silent. It's too much for them to process. It's too much for them to take in. And it's really hard for them to process it through. They do go through natural silent periods anyway. And what can happen is it's just like their lexicon, their brain. So the lexicon is where your words are stored in your brain, right? It's just like it's sorting itself out because it's going, hang on, that's a car. But in Italian, it's also macchina. And so they're going, but that doesn't make sense. There's two words for that. So they just need to take a minute to get together. But the interesting thing is they've shown that if kids have a really good, strong language base, that by the time they get to 8, they actually have double the size of vocabulary of their peers. And then I think it ends up, being more expensive by then. So I don't discourage speaking the home language. I do discourage speaking broken English to them because the reality is when they get to school, they're going to have a really good model. The problem in Australia is because we're such a multinational country, sometimes they'll end up in preschools or daycares and the teacher doesn't speak very good English either. And then we're having another issue. But it's like, okay, well, let's just kind of put the hold on that. The other thing I had on the flip side of that is when I had adult clients was they would come to me for accent modification. So accents just come from vowel sounds, right? So it's just the different vowels. So how you make the vowels. But there's certain sounds in English that other languages don't have, right? And vice versa. So like I know in Afrikaans, they have like the kind of glottal stop. It's like a kind of sound. Like we don't have that in English. And I know R is really hard and TH, especially for people who have been speaking Mandarin or, and then Italian. I know S can Italian and S can be really hard as well for people who speak traditional Spanish because they had that instead of a S and keeping their tongue in. So when I work with these adults, it's really interesting because I have worked with some that come in, they're like, oh, I need some help with my accent. And they speak like very fluent English. Like you can tell like there's a little bit of an accent there. And I'm looking at them and I'm like, well, actually, we don't have to do anything. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, I have no difficulty understanding you. And then I had a student with me, this particular client that's popping in my head. And I looked at her, I said, look, I've been doing this job a long time. You've been in it for 5 minutes, right? Like your second year at your studies. What do you think? And she goes, I can understand everything that you said. The problem was the confidence. That's where the issue is because it's like sometimes people have this perceived perception that people are undervaluing who they are because they have an accent or because their English isn't as good. Even my old boss, like when I sold my company, my boss that came from me, he was from China. So he had an accent and he had lots of issues with parents. He goes, oh, it's because I'm Chinese. They think that, because I have an accent, I don't understand them or whatever it is. And I said to him, nope, they treated my husband, because he used to help with the phones, exactly the same way. And he's as Aussie as you can get. And he goes, that actually makes me feel so much better because it's almost like this default to this cultural stigma that was coming in. And that's what I found from working with a lot of these adults is they actually just needed confidence more than needed the accent training.
Yeah, absolutely. We often use the quote of a dead American president, I forget which one, comparison is the thief of joy. And people spend so much time comparing how they sound and speak with native speakers. I'm like, what are you doing? You can't, there's no comparison to make. I've been speaking English my whole life, all 46 years of it. And you've been doing it for half that time. But, it's never going to be the same, right? There's no point in worrying about it. Understanding is the most important thing.
Yeah, and listening. And I actually have found working with a lot of children who are nonverbal. I'll tell you right now that I can have a whole conversation with a child who doesn't speak a single word, and they will get their message across very clearly because they use all their body language, they use gestures, and they use cues. And I feel like this is like a forgotten part of language when we talk about learning to communicate, right? Because before we can talk, we would cry. And then our parents got really good at interpreting our cries, right? It's like, oh, they want their nappy change or, oh, they want some food. And then we get to a point where it's just like, oh, they want to pee picked up, like, whatever. Oh, okay. Now they want cuddles, but at the same time, because we forget to stop and slow down, we miss those cues that people often can be trying to put across. And this day and age, it is a lot easier to write emails that are grammatically correct, send text messages that are grammatically correct. So that's not holding people back. It's that in-person conversation. And then when they feel that, they're not understanding me, it's like, no, actually, because you're purveying your message using other cues as well, not just the words that are coming out of your mouth.
Absolutely agreed. My youngest fit into the category of finding language a bit slower than his brother. Around about the time he started to communicate, we moved to Italy. And so we went from an English environment, living in London, into Italian environment. So suddenly there was this big swap and he was like, okay, this is strange. But at the time he had created his own series of like you say, of gestures, of noises, of things. His communication was excellent. He just wasn't using language as we know it. He had his own set of language, and English family or Italian family, everyone knew what he was talking about, right? And so in the end, when we went home for the summer after being in Italy for about a year and a half or something, he suddenly, his vocabulary improved from about 50 to 100 words and gestures. It doubled within a week. And he just then decided, oh, yeah, this is English. I remember this. And he started talking. So that was, and he still has the cutest accent as well, because he speaks English with an Italian accent and he speaks Italian with an English accent. It's brilliant.
Love it.
All the mums love him because he's hilarious. He's so funny.
It's funny because I could usually tell the main thing a lot of my clients would watch because of their accent. So if they were mad Thomas the Tank Engine fans, they all had a British accent. But if it was like Paw Patrol,
Brummie accent.
Yeah. But if they all had, what was it, like watch Paw Patrol or other things like that, they would have an American accent. It was very interesting just hearing the difference between that. But it's also the same sort of thing. So when we're around, I know I spent like 2 months in America, and you end up changing your vowel sounds so that they understand you better. And I don't know what it is, because my husband's got a very deep Australian tone that he cannot order at an Asian restaurant. They never understand him. I find it fascinating. So, for example, we'll go to order sushi and he'll say, like 2 of these and 2 of these, and then naming them. And they're like, what are you talking about? And he'll say it again. They have no idea. And then I go up and I'm like, okay, can we have this, this, and this? And they're like, yep, no worries. And he goes, I said the same thing. And I was like, I don't know.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it something to do with the pitch and the tone? Like it's just, it's too deep to register for that language?
It can be as well. And that's what a lot of people don't realize, that there's so many factors into how people hear and interpret what you say. My grandfather always complains that he can never hear me because I don't talk loud enough. And then he used to say to me, you're a speech pathologist, don't you talk loudly? I said, my clients aren't deaf. And even if they were, talking loudly is not going to help. It's actually, it's like if someone doesn't understand you, talking louder is not going to help the situation. Try rephrasing. And there was this saying when I was working with children a lot, and it was, say it once, they don't understand. That's okay. Say it again, they don't understand. Well, okay, maybe they're just not hearing you properly. But say it the same way a third time, then you've got the problem, not them. Because you actually haven't shifted anything to try and accommodate. You haven't tried to rephrase, you haven't tried to shift it, make it more simple. And often that can be a part of a communication issue in itself too, where the other person's like, well, why do I have to change how I'm talking? But sometimes that can lead to the breakdown in itself.
Yeah, it's something we do all the time as language coaches, is you're grading your language based on the person that you have in front of you. I'm pretty confident within 2 or 3 minutes, I can understand where someone is with their English, what language level they're at, and then I can adjust how I'm speaking to them to use vocabulary that they will probably know. And this is one of my bugbears about English native speakers, is they don't know enough about the English language to be able to adjust their language to their audience. And they're working in international teams with multinational companies, and they're speaking to non-native speakers in the same way that they would speak to their English colleagues wherever they are. And so there's this huge disconnect. If you were to say to an English person, you use too many phrasal verbs, they would turn around and go, "What's a phrasal verb?" And this is like this is the bugbear of all the people that I've ever worked with. They're all like, oh, phrasal verbs are so bad, right? And we use them all of the time. It's crazy.
Well, even like using analogies and things like that, because sometimes you get analogies come through, which, and each country has their own kind of lingo as well. Even lingo, people probably don't know. They have their own linguistic things that they use.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah.
For example, I was on a podcast. I was saying, oh yeah, so I used to see most of my clients every fortnight, and they're like thinking the video game, and I was like, oh no, right? Because you get it, because you're from the UK, but Americans don't use fortnight. So fortnight means 2 weeks, right? They don't say tissue; they say Kleenex. We say tissue,
Right.
Right. And so there's all these disparities even in English, depending on where you're from. Like we say, I'll go get the esky. Everyone's like, what's an esky? It's an ice box. Yeah. It's just the brands, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And this is one of the things I find really interesting about English is the adaptation of brand names as a general term for a product. Like Hoover. We use in England, I need to hoover. So it's now a verb and a noun and a brand name, right?
Well done, Hoover.
Yeah, love the Hoover. It's a vacuum cleaner for those of you that don't.
Yeah.
So we do this all the time,
I know
like Google.
Yes, go Google it. Exactly.
Google it.
It's funny.
Right.
Google it. Yeah. And these are sort of like the nuances that you don't realize that people that they struggle. So even when I would explain concepts, especially to our new parents who English wasn't their strongest language, I would draw diagrams to help, or I would draw pictures, or I would print out things to help them understand, because I think we underestimate the power of visuals and pictograms and how they actually can just provide that extra level of support. And if we think even how people learn differently too. People don't all learn from listening and talking. And in fact, most of my clients that I did work with, that was their weakest pathway. Their auditory pathway was their weakest way of learning. So we learned to use, So instead, we use visuals, or we teach them, but through doing, which is kinesthetic learning. There are other ways to engage things, right? And this is where this breakdown of, and I find it happens in the classrooms too. That's a whole other podcast. But especially when children are in the rooms and they're even if their English is their first language, and even if it isn't, I think the term at the moment in Australia, we have culturally and linguistic diverse background. I think that's the political term.
Wow, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Wow. Yeah.
Or CALD for short, right? But here's cold. But here's the thing, Liam, is that I have worked with children who have come from other countries and are purely just behind because they haven't learned English yet. And they catch up really, really quickly. And I mean, I was thinking about this client I had, and I still remember him. It was one of my first clients, and I still remember his name, and I don't normally. Anyway, but he was such a beautiful kid. He was from the Philippines. And his parents were like, we just need to get his English skills up. Like, let's put him in speech therapy. And he was like, when we assessed him, because we needed to for funding and for the school and everything like that, he was like 0.1 percentile. So if you had 100 kids, he was better than 0.1. I'm like, oh gosh, okay, here we go. The only place we can go is up, right? It's fine. Yeah, we'll go. So within a year, he was almost like, I think he was like in the 16th percentile, which was kind of borderline, but his parents were like, nah, let's make it stronger because, we don't want this to be an issue for him. But we dropped down the rate of therapy, and by another year, I was discharging him. His language was in the 50th to 75th percentile. Like he was more than okay. And so we're sitting there and I'm like, wow, that is such an example of how when it's purely language difference that they catch up. On the flip side of that, I had younger kids coming in really strong home language, also really strong language at school, like a preschool or daycare, and they weren't learning either. And I was like, "Oof, this is a bit concerning." So then I would ask the parents, and sometimes it's not technically standardized, but what I would do my part of the assessment and do all that. And I said, okay, I'm going to make a note now. Can you ask these instructions in your home language? And when they still couldn't do it, then I'm like, all right, let's break this down and go even more. Like, what's going on here? Do they even follow? No, they have no idea what's going on. So then to me, then I'm like, okay, there's something bigger going on with language. And I feel sometimes this is where these kids get lost, because it's like, oh, it's just because they're, English isn't their home language. It's like, well, no, because they're having difficulties even in their home language. And then the flip side of that is when you're learning English as an adult and then you have this accent that you think is stopping people from understanding you. I'm going to tell you right now, it doesn't matter. Like sometimes I have my Aussie twang and it comes out and people are like, oh, I missed that. And I was like, oh, and you just adjust. And it's the same, but I feel because you're coming in with this stigma of I'm already behind because, I'm on the back foot. This is where it gets lost. I did an interview with someone and her English wasn't great, but I was captivated the whole interview. I didn't care that she spoke, not the best English, because her story was powerful and she knew how to get the main points across. And I just sat there nearly the whole 30 minutes or whatever we were doing the interview for. And I was captivated by the message she was sharing because it was so powerful. I couldn't really ask her many questions or interrupt very much or have a conversation. I don't try not to interrupt, but have that conversation. But at the same time, it's been and so many people are like, wow, her story. I was like, I know. So I feel the summary of that is don't let your accent or your limited English skills be the reason why you feel you can't do something.
A penny for your thoughts. We'd really like to know what you think. So please leave your comment in the comment section. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most of the people who would be engaged with the channel, their English is definitely not limited. The level of conversation that we have is relatively high, but they set a limit for themselves a lot of the time. I think it's true to say that we're always more negative about our own abilities than anyone else.
Yeah, 100%. We're our own worst critic, right? I think that's the biggest thing. We're our own worst critic, and we're the ones that end up getting in our own way. It's not normally somebody else. Because if you're passionate and you have something you want to share, you will find a way. Whether it's you do a presentation and you've pre-recorded an AI voice over the main point that you want to get across or whatever it is because you're worried about your accent. We are in this day and age, Liam, where we have technology to support us in such a powerful way.
We do, yeah.
It's, and the translators are going to be on, at some point we're going to be walking around wearing bracelets that just automatically translate things. I've seen the tech starting to come out where you just put the earpiece in and it automatically translates what's the person saying for you. It's coming, but at the same time, don't let an accent be a limitation, or don't let your lack of grammar be a limitation. I will tell you right now, I've worked in some very low SEO areas in Sydney in Australia. And I'm talking about, actually, I worked in probably the lowest ones. That was the start of my career. And I would tell you, I was working with the child as much as the parent in terms of helping them with their language skills. And it wasn't all of them, but it was probably 70% of them was the case, because I'd be correcting the child's language or helping with their speech sounds, and I'd be working with the parent too. So, it doesn't have to be. And then on the flip side of that, my husband's best friend, he's multilingual, and he is like the grammar Nazi. He picks us up on our English all the time. And it's like, you can't use the wrong grammar with him. He's like, no. Yeah. And because he's been so hard on himself. So it's the other way around.
Yeah, it usually comes from a parent. My mum's like that. I can't get away with anything at the dinner table. My partner, on the other hand, who's Italian, she corrects her, but with love. With me, it's like, I get the look, how dare you? How dare you? I brought you up better than that. So yeah, I get that. I tell people all the time, especially from the area of London that I'm from, which is southeast London, they are very lazy with their pronunciation generally. we were talking about the TH sound earlier. So the TH sound is a classic substitution sound, depending on what country you're from, right? And the one that people from London do is instead of the TH th and v, they do th and v. So it's not mother, it's mother with a v kind of sound. It's not, what's the other, think of an example for the other one.
Bath. When in the bathtub.
Bath. Yeah, exactly.
Bathtub.
Yeah, bathtub, bath. Yeah. So
it's actually really interesting because there's a lot of people in the royal family who have atrocious speech. I will tell you right now. And I sit there and I'm like, what did they say? I can't even understand half of what's coming out of their mouth. You know, it's really interesting when you start to pay attention to it. But they still get their point across, right? Because people are listening, because they want to hear the message. And also people just overlook it. And I think if we have that kind of grace with ourselves from, you know, whatever it might be, you know, then why not? You know, like you said at the start, don't compare yourself to a native English speaker. That's not fair. It's like comparing yourself to an Olympic swimmer when you're swimming laps. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. When you're there doing doggy paddle, like, oh, just get it done, right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I want to ask you a question that you volunteered on our intake form. How can you communicate without getting lost in the words?
Ooh. Wow, I asked myself a good question, didn't I?
You did, yeah.
I feel it's actually listening to what's underneath what the person's asking you. And this happens in relationships too, because sometimes people will say things to you, but their face and their body language says something else, or even their energy. You know, when you walk into a room and you just want to walk back out because it just feels really angry or feels really like really jarring energy, that in itself is how people usually communicate. What comes out of their mouth isn't actually what they really mean. And when you start to listen for the emotion underneath, or even trust your feelings in that moment, or look at the gestures or the body language, that will tell you more than the words. Words are just words. You know, we can say, I've had clients, I have a person I'm mentoring at the moment, and she's got this client and she'll just use a big word and have no idea what it actually means. She knows the idea of it, but she's just using it to mask what's really going on underneath. So if you want to listen to the conversation really happening, trust what you're feeling, trust what you're seeing, and trust what their body language is saying. That is a better interpretation than the words coming out of their mouth.
Yeah, I think absolutely. The body language and tone is so important, right? And in English particularly, it's not always what you say, it's how you say it. Yeah. So the emotion, the intention, everything comes through from the sounds that you're making. I often direct people to watch American sitcoms, because one thing that American sitcoms is very good at is having the literal words that the character is saying, but then it's what's behind that, the way that it's delivered. That's what makes it funny. And so you can listen to the words, you can read the subtitles, but you might not get the nuance of what they're saying because you're not listening for the tone and for the intention.
Yeah. And sometimes, you know, you might be watching social media and just reading the captions, and then you're like, why is that even funny? But then you turn up the volume, and then you hear exactly like you said, you hear the tone in what it said. You know, like, I need to go to the bathroom versus I need to go to the bathroom. Very different energy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So one's
exactly.
like, right. And sometimes when you're missing all those things because you're too busy focusing on the words, you miss the whole point of what's trying to come through.
Yeah, agreed. And it's the same goes for the body language. If you're so intent on listening and concentrating on what someone's saying, you might miss what is going on with the facial expression, with the eye contact, with the posture, all of these elements which are so important and make up at least half of all of our communication. So being aware of them, we all know what body language is, but how much attention do you actually pay to it? I mean, I'm on high alert with, this is my forte, right? I'm high alert. I'm taking everything in, because most of the time I'm not actually listening. I'm watching someone.
Yeah. And it's interesting from running like social skills groups with kids who are teenagers and things like that. that's like the biggest things we teach them. It's like, all right, what is their face doing? What is their body doing? What are their hands doing? What are how do their words feel? And all those sorts of nuances. What's the tone? How close are they standing to you? Because even that can be a sign of how they're feeling.
Right.
If they
Yeah.
keep
Personal
backing
space.
away from you. Yeah. Because if they keep backing away from you, clearly they don't want to be in your space, right? Or you're too close. It could go either way.
Yeah.
And there's just so many little things. And when you start to pull it apart, it's like, oh my goodness. And then we get to conversation breakdowns. And you'd be amazed how many people are really terrible at it. So you can just ask them, it's like, I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. Could you say that again? And they'll say something the exact same way. This is what I was talking about before. And you're like, so, and the thing I like to teach is, repeat it back to them. Is this what you're asking of me? Because sometimes what we interpret people to be asking of us can be incorrect too. And, repeating it back actually shows, first of all, that you were listening. Second of all, that you're asking for clarity. And thirdly, that you're hearing what they're saying, So
I really like that. Yeah.
And listening and hearing are different things. Okay. I want to emphasize that, because
Agreed.
Active listening means you're not ready to respond. It means you're actually taking the words in. And I actually find if you're concentrating harder on the words someone's saying, you're less likely to just be drifting off and ready to just reply with whatever you need to, because you're working so hard.
Right. Yeah. Active listening without judgment. And there's a great quote that I heard on Celeste Headley. Celeste Headley's TED Talk on 10 ways to have better conversations. She talks about the importance of listening and quotes a famous person as saying, I never heard anyone who has listened their way out of a job. Which
I love
that. I thought was quite nice.
I love that.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? Yeah. I'll put a link to that video in the show notes, because it's a great video and lots of great tips in there. Don't forget to utilize the comment section below to share your key takeaway from today's conversation. Catherine, I want to ask you if you could recommend any resources, books, articles, podcasts, or anything to do with either the speech pathology work or what you're doing now. Who would you recommend? Who do you keep coming back to?
That's a tricky one. Actually, I really liked Alex Kelly's work. I don't know if she's still around. She's from the UK, actually.
Yeah.
But she has a lot of really simple things about social communication, but she also has books written for adults as well, which is like a really beautiful resource set. And she's got really funny drawings. But even if you're an adult, look at the kids' stuff, because sometimes how they explain it for a child is actually much easier to understand than for the adults. And they've got some really beautiful ones on teenagers, but a lot of it's emotional language too, which I feel sometimes that gets lost in translation between cultures as well. And that's a resource I used a lot, especially with helping children and teenagers and young adults with social difficulties. So that was one of my all-time favorites. That's what it's called, Talk About. That's her products. And in terms of anything else that I can think of, I feel too like looking up active listening. Just have a Google. Look, we're using Google again, but searching active listening tips can be really powerful, because not just like when talking and listening to people, but also when you're in relationships, which is what I'm about. But when you learn to active listen to somebody, you read the tone underneath. Like my husband will say something and imply something, and my son and I both look at each other and we're like, we're not responding, because we're like, that was a request, but it wasn't really a request. It was like one of those comments that you're like, we listen to the tone and we listen to that. Whereas other times it's like, well, actually, what do you mean by that? And asking that clarity. So even this morning, I was dropping my husband off to work in the wee hours. It was very early here, in the wee hours of the morning. And he said to me, I'm just checking how I'm going to get home. And he goes, I could just keep working until you finish, which is why we have the car, until you finish doing that. And I said, well, you don't have to do that. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I don't have to get home and you're not going to pick me up. I was like, no, I meant you don't have to keep working till that time. Like maybe someone else can drop you home or, there might be another solution. Okay. But it's amazing how if you just jump onto that, what your brain wants to put in as interpret it, that is when you can have that breakdown. So active listening can be really powerful, but also that clarity question, right? Like, no, actually, like that's not what or not being afraid to clear it up yourself. That's not what I meant. This is what I meant by that. Because sometimes then we just get lost in the nuances of what we think someone's thinking rather than what they're actually thinking.
Yes. The expectation that you should know what the other person is thinking is kind of ridiculous. Yeah. But often it comes down to that. It's like, what do you mean you don't understand what I'm thinking? Like, well, I'm not in your head. I'm afraid I can't help.
It's funny because I have psychic skills, right? But people still think that I should know what they're thinking in their head. And I'm like, sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, because I don't want to hang out in your head all the time. So thank you very much. I don't want that. Like, I don't want to be in your head. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. What's so special about your head anyway? Come on. Yeah. Nice. Okay. Fantastic. So, Catherine, what's next for you? What's coming up? What are you working on?
What am I working on? Well, I've just started my next novel. So I have one novel out called My Virtual Obsession, which is so randomly a reflection of relationships in modern technology. But I'm working on my next novel and also just really focusing on, what does it mean to really connect with people? So I'm running my little programs with little humans. That's what I like to call kids, little humans and the big humans, and just leading people back to themselves and seeing where that evolves. So I have plans, but they're just always evolving, which I love because I have that freedom now, right? Rather than here's a business driving my life.
Yes, being a slave to the business. Yeah. What was the experience like writing a novel, and how did that work out for you? It seems like something completely different to what you're doing.
Oh, I loved it. I had a few years ago, my naturopath / friend, he said to me, if you could do anything in the world, what would it be? And I said, I would write. And then I had this dream. And it was like a movie, like watching a whole movie. And I woke up and I went, I need to write that into a book. So I started doing 15 minutes a day and I wrote a 90,000 word novel. And I was like, I've written a novel. And then I had someone edit it. And then I actually used ChatGPT to do the final edits, because what it was really good at was cutting out all the fluff that didn't need to be in there. So I actually ended up cutting out 30,000 words, which is pretty amazing considering. But the flip side of that was, then I wrote this amazing book. So I have a Substack as well. So it's willowhealing.substack.com. So I write articles and my podcast comes out through there. But the point is that if you have an idea of what you want to do, just do it and see what happens with it. And so that's what I did. And I actually really love writing. If I am in the right creative headspace, I will happily write article after article. I will create things, but that is if I'm in the mood. If I'm not in the mood, I don't try and force it, because then it's not fun anymore. And then I don't want to do that either. Yeah. So it was different, but it wasn't different, because I've always spoke. I used to write and create programs for schools and preschools, but this was actually just writing something fun, which it was. Right. It was really fun. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, fantastic. And so will the second book be linked to the first, or is it something of its own?
It's completely different. So same kind of theme. So I actually realize I write dark romance or romantic thrillers, weirdly. It's really weird. I don't even know how I write. I don't even read them, but somehow I'm writing them. But the next one's very left field to the current one. So we'll see how it eventuates and what comes out of it. But why not?
Horses for courses. There's everything that is available. Why not? Exactly. Why not? Exactly. Fantastic. Catherine, thank you so much for being a guest today. Can you leave our audience with a final thought, sharing of wisdom?
I feel if you have something you want to share in this world, you'll find a way to share it no matter what. So don't let language be the barrier.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. You will be able to find all of Catherine's links to Substack and podcast, etc., in the show notes or the comment section below. Catherine, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully we can get together for a part 2 at some point in the future.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me, Liam.
You're welcome. All right. Thank you so much. Bye.